Welcome again to Mike Montagne on Mathematically Perfected Economy and Absolute Consensual Representation. For the sake both of new listeners and of conducive review, I apologize for repeating the purposes of this program. My original 1968 thesis of Mathematically Perfected Economy was a proof of one and one only monetary solution. 44 years ago, the present topic was an original proof that the purported banking systems which have imposed themselves upon the present world are inherently terminal. That is, the present topic relates to an original fundamental analysis of currency, which demonstrated that by obfuscating our promissory obligations into falsified debts to mere publishers of further representations of our promissory obligations, and by subjecting those falsified debts to purported interest, despite a fact the mere publisher has no commensurable property or entitlement at stake, we are forced without warrant or justification to pay principal and interest out of a vital circulation comprised of only remaining principal. An obligation does exist in the fact of every promissory obligation, but this is not an obligation to pay and to launder the principal into the unwarranted possession of a purported banking system, which, of course, exists merely for the purpose of unwarranted, unassented, and imposed exploitation. Neither are banking systems actual creditors. For as the only issuers of promissory obligations, not only are we the only rightful and actual issuers of currency, likewise, we alone give up property for promissory obligations, which thus represent entitlement to the overall pool of wealth, which can only be enforced by an immutable representative currency, which is impossible under the purposed exploitation of purported banking. The theses of mathematically perfected economy prove instead that owing to a fact every real creditor is paid in full from the outset of every such arrangement. Payments of the principal of our promissory obligations are instead to be retired from circulation, as they no longer represent value or redeemability, and as such, they no longer represent the property or entitlement of anyone. A vital fact of the present topic, therefore, is that the present falsifications of debt and unwarranted imposition of interest impose an implicit obligation to maintain a vital circulation by perpetually borrowing principal and interest back into a general circulation possessed by industry and commerce, with the reflation of principal comprising new debt equal to any former sum of debt we might otherwise presume to be resolved. And with this perpetual, indispensable reflation of principal, therefore, making it mathematically impossible to pay down any prior sum of debt. Thus, an equally indispensable reflation of interest perpetually increases every prior sum of debt by so much as periodic interest until we inevitably suffer the present terminal global monetary failure. In further proof of these theses, in 1983 and 1984, I produced computer models for the Reagan administration, which, by no more than replicating this process, were capable not only of prescribing how much interest rates had to be reduced to achieve a maximum possible lifespan of these terminal systems of exploitation, but of calculating the maximum possible lifespan, therefore, of any purported economy subject to the present purposed obfuscation of our currency. In 1984, those models which you can still download and deploy from my pages, complete with unrefuted source code, projected that the present unrecoverable failure would transpire at approximately 2010 AD. Today, the singular deductions of these mathematic proofs are perhaps both the most plagiarized and compromised monetary theses in history. Yet the original work disproves all ensuing work, in a fact that from its inception, mathematically perfected economy was a proof of singular monetary solution. Today, nonetheless, literally millions of web pages and vast, ostensibly formal literature now merely imitate these proofs' vital eradication of interest, the reasons for which competing works, 40-some-odd years later, still fail even to correctly articulate. Pretending to have researched history and thinking my work to be Benjamin Franklin's, major plagiarists of my work have called a currency prescribed by my 1975 Parable of Perfect Economy the most brilliant banking model in history. But the prescribed currency of mathematically perfected economy was never a banking model at all. It was a currency which eradicated banking and its redundant, desolating, terminal exploitation. Likewise, the currency of this mere story was never the work of Franklin. On the contrary, it was prescribed by my own work and words, issued merely through a fictional person of Benjamin Franklin in a mere story. Today, without proven fundaments, and in mere imitation of this original monetary reform presence of today's Internet, countless propositions of banks and alternate currencies rise in profusion. As my original work proved, however, none of these propositions can save us, and thus we are forced to attend to deviates and impostors constantly. To preserve the sanctity of this original work, all original material, analyses, and solution, as always, therefore, are copyrighted and trademarked by yours truly. All rights, and therefore claims of authority, are reserved. Archives of this program can be downloaded freely from perfectedeconomy.org/FTP. Copies can be distributed freely only so long as the entirety of this program, including this copyright and trademark notice, remain intact. Much thanks to the band Q-Ree of Chicago, Illinois for Patty Ryan's Despair. You can find their music at qree.com. That's spelled C-U-R-O-Y. Yesterday I hosted two separate meetings with a number of people who are interested in, some of whom have not done substantial background work on mathematically perfected economy, researching how they would apply the arguments of mathematically perfected economy to protect themselves in foreclosure, bankruptcy, and eviction situations. The first of these meetings actually extended beyond that scope of considerations. But because the second meeting therefore addressed a simpler set of issues, the general issues that most of us will be concerned with, I thought I'd broadcast today the content of the latter meeting, which was with approximately 10 people, some of whom you're already familiar with. So the scope of this meeting was the intention of it was to bring people up to speed with a general idea of exercising this mandate as an argument to protect us from foreclosure and bankruptcy and eviction, and to immediately resolve our falsified debts. And I want to stress that I'm not saying to pay our debts or to pay our falsified debts, to resolve our falsified debts. So the reason I'm playing this really is so that you can study, you can repeat the explanations yourselves. You'll notice that I stress certain things which are very important for us to understand. And one of these things is that we have to avoid admission of the material of plagiarists. Why? It's absolutely not credible. You're not going to prevail in court or against the sheriff for an eviction process by claiming money was created out of thin air and that you do not have a debt. Now, a very important thing to understand then, as you listen to this program, is that I explain how this resolves our debt. In the case of Michael Tellinger, for instance, and many of you have heard the interview that I conducted with Michael Tellinger, in which I schooled him that his situation was not one in which he does not have a debt. And if he attempted to claim that, he would lose. If he had heeded my advice, his debts he might not have had to resume payments for decades, perhaps a half a century, beyond his likely lifespan. And when, if at all, he was required to resume payments, generally they would have been approximately 1/12 of what they are now. So effectively, this would have eliminated any further need to pay immediately because of the escalated rates of payments under the present obfuscation of the currency. So without further ado, I only ask you please to pay careful attention to this program, because to deviate from its pattern will cost not only yourself but the rest of us. Note that we address the issues of approaches to legal approaches to defense, which are failing on account of false assertions that there is no debt, that money is created out of thin air, and all these preposterous notions which will get you nowhere in court. So without further ado, this was yesterday's meeting. Excuse me for being late, guys. I had another person with a much more complicated situation want to get in on this meeting, and I was thinking about including them, but what happened is we ended up going through all the ramifications of their issues, doing the math, and sort of mapping out a much more complicated approach than we probably are faced with here. The reason I wanted to have this meeting is just to give people a general idea of how the arguments of I'm just going to say my work rather than mathematically perfected economy, because mathematically perfected economy is a solution of issues. It's a proof of a singular solution of our issues, whereas generally also refer to it as an identification of the problems, and that is this obfuscation of the currency or falsified indebtedness to a purported banking system which gives up no lawful consideration commensurable to the debts it falsifies, therefore has no property at stake which could justify interest, which further imposes this implicit obligation to maintain a vital circulation by perpetually borrowing principal and interest back into the general possession of industry and commerce, which increases the debt perpetually by so much as periodic interest on an ever greater sum of debt until we suffer the present inevitable failure. So what I really wanted to do is lay out the basic process so people here can decide whether or not they want to pursue these arguments. And so what this means are many things. It defines a strategy of how to approach these problems, and
Mike, you dropped out back there, and we just lost everything. You decided whether or not you want to pursue, and then it went nothing.
Okay, how's everybody else hearing me? Was that just you? I don't know, David. What do you mean?
Sorry, I think I DC'd. Sorry about that.
I can hear you fine, Mike. It's just there was a bit of a hiccup just once there, but apart from that, everything was fine. I don't know about the rest.
Okay.
I got a long blank. So decide whether or not to pursue, and if you just repeat that a little bit. Pursuance of these arguments is, of course, not compulsive. It's up to our discretion. But if we're going to succeed in these things, I'm personally absolutely convicted to the fact that many of the arguments which are springing up on a daily basis are unjustifiable, and they will never prevail in a court of law. And of course, it's our interest to prevail in a court of law because these matters are going to fall there eventually if the banking system chooses to contest our resolution of these matters as we would contest it under the arguments of mathematically perfected economy. I was hoping to include Vin, albeit for just one nuance that we can polish up later, and that is that he's insistent that the breach of contract be raised as instead
breach of trust, right?
As a breach of trust. Yes, and there's a reason. There's a legal reason that those terms are indeed the applicable terms, and there's a consequence in many of the courts which are akin to the British model, let's call it, which isn't necessarily British at all. The United States and Canada have a similar pattern, and
call it the Crown, Mike.
Well, we can. I kind of have an aversion for doing that because my own personal opinion is that any argument that we bring in to our condition, which isn't relevant to prevailing, is not only a distraction, it's a potential fault which can nullify our case. And I have some documents from one of us and their particular point in the timeline of the affairs that transpire when we have a mortgage default situation. And it's quite evident, it's blatantly evident that the attorneys which are taking over for the bank are intending to presume that one of us is going to pursue arguments which they've only learned recently on the internet, all of which have been disproven. Well, any of us that are have even a rudimentary mastering of mathematically perfected economy and its arguments of inherent failure as a consequence of the obfuscation of the currency, we're all aware that none of these arguments have been exercised in the banking system, and in fact none of the plagiarists and imitators of this work are even articulating them correctly. So
basically, I think what I'd like to do, and I don't mean to make this a matter of non-debate, but these arguments are mature enough in terms of how many times they've been contested by just intellectually by people, and survived all intellectual tests in the condition that they are in. That it makes little sense for us to argue them. It's most important first to understand them well enough to know what we may or may not be arguing against if we decided to do so. And of course, if you're arguing against them or advocating that you take up some other course somehow, that's another matter. But and I just hang that up. Be that as it may, we have a situation to deal with, and all of us have, in this particular initial discussion, have an interest in resolving a mortgage situation which is either in default or going to go into default, and eventually, or even perhaps immediately, we would like to exercise these same arguments against a mortgage which is not in default, only because these arguments resolve the mortgage to what its rightful state would be, and that is a fraction of present costs imposed upon the purported debtor. So I first want to just give what the basic process is here. We have a mandate which we would sign, and as a signatory, we're claiming rights to mathematically perfected economy and absolute consensual representation as sovereign individuals. We are proving in this mandate that the present obfuscation of our currency precipitates in inevitable monetary failure, the form of which is a set of artificial conditions imposed upon us by banking, which make it impossible for us to fulfill the debt service obligations which have been imposed upon us. And I should say falsified, multiplied debt service obligations which have been imposed upon us. So the way that this is exercised is that we have the mandate as our documentation of our arguments, and we would exercise it in a variety of ways. And generally, that variety of ways would take this form. We would submit what I call rights claimant forms to the sheriff, to the district attorney, to the county courthouse, and to the financial institutions at which we have these purported debts. And these virtually identical rights claimant forms merely cite that the arguments in the mandate itself, so they just refer to section numbers. They refer to the mandate itself, citing a fact. I just see that Carl came online here. I don't know that Carl is part of the conversation or not. So anyway, I'm just going to continue. We're asserting these arguments of the mandate, which proves that the banking system's obfuscation of our promissory obligations can rightly result in no factual debt to the banking system at all, because the banking system never gave up lawful consideration commensurable to the debts it therefore falsifies to itself. It is simply and purely creating further representations, whether they be digital or physical forms of money. It's simply creating further forms or representations of our promissory obligations. And it does itself not give a value to money itself, which is important because unless we understand that point, we do not understand that the debts are not to the bank. Now, a debt does exist. And so we discredit ourselves, and it's a conflicting argument to assert that the debts do not exist. What we're actually arguing for here is a resolution of our debts. What are our debts? Since the banking system never gave up lawful consideration commensurable to the debts it's falsifying to itself, the debt does exist because, in truth, we are paying each other in the remainder of a promissory obligation. And this is why we have to understand the natural disposition and life cycle of promissory obligations. So, this disposition is basically that money is taking the place of an obligation to pay for property. So when we acquire a home by issuing a promissory obligation, the real creditor is the former possessor of the home, and they accept a promissory obligation or a representation of a promissory obligation, which we're giving the scope of currency. We're allowing a representation of a promissory obligation to circulate as currency, which is redeemable in the pool of wealth that we and we alone, not the banking systems, but we and we alone contribute to. Now, how is the creditor paid? They have a receipt that we will pay for the home with a like measure of our production, and they can spend that on the overall pool of wealth if we contribute it to the overall pool of wealth. And the way that we contribute it, since they're paid in full, so long as that representation of a promissory obligation is redeemable, the way that they're paid is that they can collect that wealth from the pool of wealth if we contribute it. And the proof that we've contributed is that we are paid in promissory obligations for our contribution, and we retire them in payment from circulation. So as we pay for the home, the promissory obligations are retired from circulation because they no longer represent value. And the reason they no longer represent value is that they have been fulfilled. So paid principal is actually never the rightful property of anyone. It no longer represents entitlement because entitlement aspect of the promissory obligation has been fulfilled. Therefore, they no longer represent value. And we are actually demanding then that this is the state that our promissory obligations are resolved to, because it's their natural and only rightful state, because the banking system neither guaranteed that itself or contributed itself any value in money, nor is it possible to maintain immutable representations of value, wealth, or entitlement under a banking system because it's laundering principal into its possession and because it's imposing interest, which multiplies falsified indebtedness in proportion to a circulation, which dedicates ever more of the circulation instead to servicing debt instead of immutable representation of property. All of these arguments are in the mandate. We want to master them at least to the degree that we understand that whatever happens in court or in interacting with the banks or interacting with lawyers is restrictive to this obfuscation of the currency, because the banking system, it's only possible recourse against this argument that they obfuscate our promissory obligations into falsified debts. They are going to claim that they lent us money that already existed, because that money ostensibly would be insulated or impervious to the arguments that of this obfuscation of the currency. So they're going to say, well, we lent you depositors' money, and they're going to argue that that's their defense against you, and so the debts, there is property at stake, which does justify interest, although technically this probably wouldn't justify interest to the banking system still. But this is going to be their argument, and we have to steer the issue back to the obfuscation of the currency immediately in every case, because it isn't possible for the banking system to loan us money of its own possession, which would be the only thing that justified interest or paying the principal to the bank, because it can't ever possess this money, because in the very first place the principal was not evidence of its property or entitlement. It should have been retired from circulation when it was paid. It is not the property of the bank, so it never can be laundered into the rightful possession of the banking system. And furthermore, because it wasn't evidence of its rightful property or entitlement, and because no property or entitlement of the banking system is at stake or risk then, therefore interest was never justified. Therefore, since neither principal nor interest are rightful or the property of the banking system, it's never possible afterward for the banking system to loan us money of its own rightful possession. So that's why we have to master that argument that the obfuscation of the currency denies that there is any means whatsoever to launder so much money as is necessary to loan us into the rightful possession of the banking system. So that's how we have to be able to react to this fact. Now, I know some of you are claiming that the debts don't exist or they're not our debts. This is a conflicting argument, and it has no basis at all in these arguments. You've gone to a bank, you've acquired a home by signing a contract to pay the principal, and you've agreed, thinking wrongly, that you're borrowing money from the bank. You've agreed to pay interest reluctantly, not understanding this, never having had the actual facts of the matter explained as they are. So this is where there's a breach of trust. The banking system is pretending to loan us money when in fact all it's doing, since this money wasn't in its possession at creation, all it's doing is creating further representations of our own promissory obligations. It's a matter of the fact that we have gone to a banking system and we have signed a contract to pay the principal subject to interest under the wrongfully impressed upon us that the banks are loaning us this actual money. So this is the breach of trust. There is no way for this to have been laundered into either the principal or the interest, to be laundered into the possession of the banking system, because they never gave up lawful consideration. There was no property or entitlement at risk. And so it's the ancient ruse of the money changers unfolded here. So anyway, the basic process then for exercising these arguments is not to claim that the debt doesn't exist or it's not our debt, but we are attempting to restore our debts to their rightful state, which is, as a consequence of these arguments, to count all prior payments of interest instead toward principal, and to resume payments against any remaining balance, if any, at the rate of consumption of the related property, which we are to decide. So now, so what's going on here is when we do this, what will happen is, suppose you've paid for against a mortgage for 5 years. Well, the general approximate ratio of the disparity between the costs of servicing a mortgage under this system and under mathematically perfected economy, the costs are about a 12 to 1 disparity. That is, under this system, it might cost $1,000 a month for a $100,000 home with a 100-year lifespan, whereas under mathematically perfected economy, instead of $1,000 per month, it's approximately $1,000 a year. So the disparity is generally approximately 12 to 1. So how does this shake out then when we resolve the debts as a matter of our process here? Is that we're approximately 12 times as far into our schedule of payments as we would be otherwise. What does that mean? If you've paid for 5 years against a mortgage, that would equate to 60 years of payment under mathematically perfected economy. It also means that instead of $1,000 a month, the payments are $83.33 a month. So the actual fact of the matter would resolve to approximately this. That is, if you paid 5 years against the mortgage, that equates to 60 years. So you could be 5.5 years into it, 6 months in arrears, and in foreclosure, whereas resolving that to its rightful state would mean that you wouldn't make another payment for 55 years under mathematically perfected economy, because you're 55 years ahead of the rightful rate of payment of a promissory obligation, which we also have to understand has an obligatory schedule of payment which is equal to the rate of consumption of the related property. Now that's another matter which is covered in the mandate. I don't need to repeat it now, but the arguments of our case resolve the matter to this, should they prevail. We discredited ourselves by deviating from those arguments. You can't say the debt doesn't exist. You cannot say it isn't our debt, unless, of course, that's true and you can prove it. But whatever arguments you're going to provide for that differ and conflict with these arguments. These arguments revise your debt to its rightful state, and you did assume a debt because you did sign a contract. So, and in fact, our federal debts are our debts too. They may not be justly imposed upon us. They have been multiplied far beyond their initial and rightful costs. So these arguments resolve our public debt as well. That is, our debts that are owed through government, ostensibly to ourselves again. But they're resolved likewise to a rightful state by the same processes of counting all prior payments of interest instead toward principal, including accounting for the further debt that's accumulated by the fact that we never paid off the original debts and have only borrowed further, assuming that there was a deficit which only exists as a consequence of the obfuscation. So the same arguments, even in fact more dramatically, reduce our public debt than they reduce our private debt. So our private debt resolutions are in fact an understatement of how these same principles apply to public debt. But they would put every government, in the world into an immediately solvent state. They resolve all of the falsified indebtedness that's been imposed upon us through government. So likewise, if we paid 10 years against a mortgage, that would be 120 years under mathematically perfected economy. So we could be a year in arrears, or 11 years into the life cycle, and yet that would resolve to 109 years that we wouldn't make another payment under this rectification of our debt. And in fact, if applying the interest and principal exceeded the original principal, the debt is resolved. So most debts, in most of the falsified indebtedness of the world, is resolved by this. We become immediately at least 12 times as liquid, and in most cases it's many times the present progress in servicing a debt off into the future that we even resume payments, and those payments, if any, are approximately 1/12 as much. And we exercise this by virtually identical set of rights claimants forms that we file with the local sheriff, optionally with a district attorney, with a local courthouse. You can even file one with some government offices you want to inform of this process. And of course, you're going to do it at the financial institutions. And so basically, you're going to go with a witness to the bank after you've filed with the sheriff, and the sheriff knows why you're exercising these arguments, and you're requiring that this case be tried in a court of the people, and we're designating what those courts are in the mandate, and we're dictating what the decision has to be in the mandate. And in the end, we go to the bank then, and we file our rights claimant form, which cites the mandate as proof of the obfuscation, of terminal failure, of singular solution, of singular just means for converting the present system into mathematically perfected economy, not only virtually immediately, but even without cost. And we are holding the courts accountable to decide that, because we are stating that that's the only rightful conclusion that they can come up with. So we're really tying even the hands of the court with this mandate under penalty of treason for failing to uphold these arguments unless they can be disproven. So you're actually asking the bank to accept a piece of paper that you're going to sign when you get there. You're going to ask what the balance of your debts are, including prepayment penalties and any other additional costs, and they may not give you the figure, and they may, and if they don't, you write, "We'll pay to the bearer on demand, infinity," and if they do, you may put the amount in there, or you can put infinity at your discretion, and you sign it. You ask them to sign it, that they received it. You have a friend recording the entire proceedings, and we even authorize ourselves the authority to do this, to record all these events in the mandate. And then you leave this piece of paper with the bank, not as full payment for the debt, but as a resolution of the falsified debt to the banking system. So we're informing them that they can take us to court now and contest the propriety of the currency. That is, that they can contest that it's rightful for them to impose this obfuscation of our promissory obligations upon us by a means, subject to a means of exploitation, which in fact is terminal. So that's the general process. That's the object of it. And in turn, we're giving government a deadline of December 21st, 2012 to comply. That is, to establish mathematically perfected economy, including its infrastructures, so that we can resume payments of our rightful promissory obligations, free of exploitation and subject to an obligatory schedule of payment at the rate of consumption of the related properties. And that's it. So this is about doing that, and that means that if you're advocating anything else, or you're attempting to search your case through what you perceive to be law, which may only be a loophole that gives you some authority to resist or claim that the debts don't exist or whatever, that's in conflict with these arguments, and I deem that these other things are indefensible, that they will fail, and in fact we see evidence that they are failing. In fact, the work that I'm seeing, the paperwork, the actual documents of these proceedings indicate this profoundly, that we have no leeway to deviate from these infallible arguments, because in our Freedom of Information Act inquiry against the Bank of England, for example, the Bank of England has even refused to acknowledge that the question of whether they give up lawful consideration commensurable to the debts they've therefore falsified to themselves. They've denied that question is even germane or intelligible even. And of course it's intelligible, and of course it's germane. And if we have imposed these banking systems without an irrefutable answer to that question, which justifies banking, then banking, in fact, has never been justified. Now, whether or not banks are going to even challenge us in courts of law is a question. And we are engaging in the risk of whether or not our mandate is upheld, whether or not the general public is willing to adopt it, whether or not we can enforce it, whether or not the general public does so. But in truth, everyone who has any debt has little, if any, other choice. Likewise, our youngest generations absolutely have no other choice, because tremendous unwarranted sum of falsified debt is being foisted upon them for nothing whatsoever. And at best, they can only hope to tread water as artificial sustention maintains a terminal state for all the while longer, until it fails to reach sufficient jeopardized sectors, which in turn fail and jeopardize further adjacent sectors, and the whole thing comes down like the house of cards, which it is. So that's pretty much what I wanted to present to all of you as a group, and then whatever questions you may or may not have, we can deal with at least what we can now, and decide whether or not we're in this together, whether or not we have any other option. And of course, if we're in this together, I'm not in it at all. For anyone who wants to claim that the debts don't exist, that money's created out of thin air, that they're not our debts. There is an original debt which is ours somewhere. Someone incurred it. But what we're after here is resolving it to what it is. Obviously, if some of us think that we can go on persisting in some idea that we can just monetize our production by signing a piece of paper, occupy a house, and never pay for it by producing an equal volume of production to the intents to acquire equal production of the real creditor who gives up the home, then we're deluded, and we can have no room for that kind of thinking in a group of people whom are going to prevail in this matter, because that's to the discredit of all of us. As soon as we admit some falsehood as a purported argument which is entirely inconsistent and unnecessary to accomplishing the objects of this mandate, then we shoot ourselves in the foot. And the first person to do this establishes a precedent which brings the rest of us down. So what I seek to do is to help those who are on the same page, who realize that we have irrefutable arguments here to proceed upon, and these people have to be dedicated enough to this that they're not going to mess it up for the rest of us. And that's all I really ask for my efforts here.
I've got a question. Few actually. I'll start with the simpler one. Do you think we should, when we're going to be going into courts and signing the irredeemable promise to pay and giving it to the banks, do we wait for them to take us to court? I know I mentioned this before, but you kind of, I think I got different replies at times from you. Or do we actually initiate and file a lawsuit against the bank?
You can do it either way. It's really indifferent. Except that being as we probably don't want to stand by ourselves against the entire system, especially as when you get to this state of defeasance yourself, you are unable to afford a lawyer, particularly a lawyer possessed and convicted to the wherewithal which would prevail in the case. Since we're going in relatively defenseless except for our mastery of these arguments and our willingness to participate in a court system which is prejudiced to judge us unfairly, it's better that I think that we allow the impetus to reach court to accumulate. That is, I believe it's better to leave it to the banking system in the beginning to attempt to challenge us. And I believe that if we present our case conclusively in our initial interactions with the banks, that they will realize that they have a tremendously challenging issue to confront here. And what they're really faced with is strategizing how to keep this argument of the obfuscation out of the case. Now, they're going to use the other cases which have been discredited where people are trying to claim that the debt doesn't exist or the money is created out of thin air, so ostensibly the debt doesn't exist, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They're going to want to equate whatever you're raising to something that you, in your deficient understanding of law and propriety and justice, have assumed is a defense for not paying a debt that you've signed a contract to service. So we have to be capable of redirecting our defense or offense, whichever the case may be, to those arguments ourselves. We have to skillfully negotiate to that place, and this is why Vincent's point about raising the breach of trust is critical, because this is what raises the attention of the judge to the fact that we have a breach, what in truth is a breach of representation of the matter, where the debt is pretended to be loaned to us from the possession of the banking system. And this makes it extremely critical for us to understand, well, yeah, they could loan us money that exists today, and so that has value, and evidence of or representation of entitlement is indeed at stake then. We cannot allow the intellectual process of evaluating this to jump into the matter at that way far downstream point of assuming money's got value, because we're the only ones who produce. We're the only ones who give a promissory obligation value. We're the only ones who make it possible for the real creditor to redeem a promissory obligation in a like volume of wealth. The banking system is entirely redundant to the matter. So, and they give no contribution themselves, so therefore there is no debt to the banking system. The obligation is to each other. This is why I say our promissory obligations to each other. Now, on the other hand, we can take the initiative and challenge the banks ourselves. If say, for instance, a very good attorney came to me and said, Mike, Here's how to deal with this under the present system of law as it exists in the United States. Now, the state of affairs may be different in Ireland and Scotland and England and Spain and France and Brazil and Venezuela and, Canada and, Japan and Australia. It's different across the world. But if a lawyer who specialized in practice in the United States saw these arguments and said, Mike, we can win this, and this is how to do it. This is the process. And they convinced me that they had it down, and if we had the money to pay for trying the case, I would do it. You see, I would do it preemptively. So eventually, there may be such a case, but given the fact of the mandate and its approach to the problem, we as the people are already deciding it. And that's our strongest procedure. This is what you have to understand about that. That is the strongest procedure. If you go to the court system of a corrupt government owned by banking, hoping to try this, you've got all the odds against you. You're being tried by their puppets. What you really want to do is say, no, we're taking control of our government back. We don't even need to try this in any court of law. But we're saying it can only be tried in our courts, and that our courts are bound to determine what we have predestined to be the determination on this. We have already decided that this is unjustifiable. No justification has ever been provided in history. We recognize that to be a fact. We recognize that what we want to do is to issue our own promissory obligations through a common monetary infrastructure free of exploitation and subject to an obligatory schedule of payment, retiring principal at the rate of consumption of the related property. Period. You have no other alternative. This cannot be tried in a case of law, in a court, because we have already determined that this is our form of government. That economy, true economy, there is only one true economy, and this is it. Now, if anything, to save themselves, they would want to rush this into a court once they decide how they're going to get around this argument. In fact, that they have never given up lawful consideration commensurable to the debts which they therefore falsify to themselves. If, for instance, you come to my house and you want to borrow a 14-inch crescent wrench to deal with some nut on your plumbing or whatever like that. You don't have a wrench. You need this wrench. Okay? And I borrow it from the neighbor next door, pretending to lend it to you myself, pretending that the property's at risk and that I want 3 wrenches back for the time that you hold it. Obviously, all of us realize that this is not right or warranted, that the person who owns the wrench, the real wrench that we end up using, is the real lender of the wrench, that I, who pretend to lend it to you, gave it no value. It's not my wrench. It isn't my right to assume that I have something at risk when I'm really assuming a risk for someone else. Now, regardless how that all shakes out, which is a different matter, and which is why we don't want to use any metaphors for this, the promissory obligation is our promissory obligation. When it starts as a contract, which is a promissory obligation, how does it get to be this other thing? You see? How does it get to be a debt to a banking system? Well, indeed, we might pay the principal to a banking system if we charge the banking system with retiring the principal and accounting for that. But the banking system has only done this to launder the principal into its unwarranted possession. It's a crime against us all. They don't want to go into court to have to defend this because there isn't a proof in eternity that they ever gave up lawful consideration. So this is a fact that they're stealing from us to launder principal into their unwarranted possession and to pretend that property of the banking system is at stake so they can impose interest upon us, which multiplies the original falsified debts into an inevitably terminal sum of falsified indebtedness. So, do we want to take this into court? No. What we really want is them to take us into court if they feel like challenging it. And they're going to wait, I would deem, if they have any brains about them at all. And they've already probably been planning on this for a long time. But if they had a way to prevail over us, we'd already see it. We would already see it. We would see it in disinformation on the internet. We would have pro-banking advocates who are stooges or shills of the banks who would advocate arguments. And I mean, we've seen these kinds of things forever. I mean, my original page is, a fellow named Edward Flaherty, who was a professor at one of the colleges in the southern eastern United States. He came up with a website, Federal Reserve Conspiracy Theories Debunked, and he purported to debunk all Federal Reserve conspiracy theories. In other words, anything that was adverse to the Federal Reserve was a conspiracy theory, and he purported to debunk them all on his website. So eventually, I knew nothing about this fellow, and eventually his students wrote me, and they said, Mike, you say this, Mr. Flaherty says that, What's the difference? Well, this guy just claimed that all this was justified, but he didn't show how. So I wrote an essay, and actually I answered emails for a long time until I got so many of them from the students of this professor that I took exception to it, and I wrote an essay in response to his website, Federal Reserve Conspiracy Theories Debunked. I wrote an essay which I titled Edward Flaherty Debunked. And so I invalidated all of his propositions and proved this, obfuscation of the currency and so on and so forth. And I get countless emails from his students then and thanking me for putting this guy down. And a couple years went by. And I got an email, very apologetic, gentlemanly email from the head of the university. And it basically went like this: Dear Mr. Montagne, I understand that this controversy with our Professor Edward Flaherty has been troubling and all, and we very much appreciate the work that you put into invalidating his ideas. And as a consequence of your excellent essay, we're suffering tremendous embarrassment at the university here, and we've had Mr. Flaherty take his web pages down. Would you be so kind as to do the same? And I complied. That's why I don't have that essay online any longer. But we would have these people everywhere advocating how the bank would defend itself against this argument of its obfuscation of the currency. And there would be a fact of the matter that they gave up property of commensurable value to acquire the currency if they're going to justify banking to all of us, including the imposition of interest, which has rendered these artificial conditions which have made it impossible for us any longer to service our mortgages. This is what's depleted our markets of our businesses, it's what's put us out of work. It's what's multiplied a sum of debt upon us that we can no longer afford to service. This is all these things are consequences of this obfuscation of the currency, which has even imposed upon us an artificial obligation to basically finance everything just so that we can sustain a circulation, hoping that somehow we're going to make out better against it, while in fact it is only multiplying ever worse conditions upon us, which is why we have to resolve it now.
Hi, Mike. It's Carl here.
Hey, Carl.
Hey, how you doing, Mike?
Oh, good. Same.
Same as usual. Okay. Well, I came in late, unfortunately, because would you believe it? 3 minutes before due time, the internet goes down at my end.
Oh my goodness.
Anyway, coincidences aside, I kind of want to jump straight into how we're going to actually try and do this, because of course, one, we have to convince people that this really is the only way that we can go, despite all the others out there, and we know who they are, the gold back currency bugs and all these people that think they should be resource based and whatever. It's based on old style thinking, which doesn't really work,
or new style thinking it's not even half baked. They haven't even begun to account for all the issues. And by the way, fellas, I'm recording this, so anybody that's missed any part of it, I'll be broadcasting it tomorrow as a radio program. So anything you don't want to divulge publicly, be discreet about it. Offer it in abstract terms. Whatever. I'm not going to disclose who's participated in this meeting or whatever, but, because I just want our listeners and our followers to see, what kinds of things are discussed and how they're discussed and how they're accounted for. I just had I intended to work today, and I had another meeting just before this one, which is why I was a few minutes late to make the call, because I didn't even wrap it up. But we were dealing with all these issues again. So this is actually the second time today that I'm going through the same issues, and in fact less convoluted issues in the case of dealing with an eviction or a foreclosure or bankruptcy situation. And by the way, the monetary issues are these, but I know Ben Gilroy and David Brown have been arguing also against the constitutionality of the authorities that are executing evictions, for instance. These arguments are in no way conflicting with those arguments, but they are conflicting with the assertion, and they discredit these arguments by asserting that no debt exists, or it's not our debt. And this is very important, I believe, for us to clear these things up before we take any further steps, because this isn't some willy-nilly matter that you can just go out there and start shouting the sky is falling, on one hand, and the other hand say, okay, well, you don't have the authority to execute this eviction, so let's resolve this much at least. You bought some time there. But that doesn't resolve the debt. Now, if you provided these same arguments to resolve the debt, you had all this stuff printed out, you had your rights claimant forms, the sheriff's going to see it, you say, okay, by the way, you're going back, would you mind leaving this copy off at the courthouse and this with the district attorney, and here's for your banking friends, and obviously they probably have a lawyer who's in contact with you, and here's a further copy for the lawyer as well. Okay, and here I'm going to do this right before you right now. I'm going to resolve the falsified debt to the bank. Right here, and I don't even care what it is. We'll pay to the bearer on demand, infinity. I'm signing it. Would you please sign it that you witnessed that I did this? And this is what I'm claiming resolves a falsified debt to the bank. It does not claim that the debt doesn't exist. It's claiming that it's resolved to a rightful state of a promissory obligation, which the bank had no stake in, contributes no value to, has no intrinsic interest in it whatsoever, except to exploit us. And it's intervening upon our commerce to do so, and that has imposed these artificial conditions of terminal failure, which have ultimately made it impossible to persist in a debt. And so, yeah, Ben was talking about, well, we were ignorant then, and now we're educating ourselves. Well, that's what we're doing here. We're educating ourselves. What should our debts be? But the thing is, we split up. If we go off on form another group claiming my arguments as their solution, and yet potentially deviating from the arguments and discrediting them, and for the sake of deviation or glory or money or whatever, there's no charges being made for this now, but I claim intellectual property rights to these arguments for one reason only, and that is to protect them from further adulteration or degradation, which compromises a vital world movement of asserting our rights to mathematically perfected economy and absolute consensual representation. So I want to be clear, those are my interests. This isn't about charging anybody or charging anybody in the future or anything like that, but it is about protecting this from further compromisation by creating another movement which never understood these things before, but is taking these arguments and effectively stealing them for at least at the consequence of dividing us among a variety of purported solutions. So I sort of already covered a lot of that ground, Carl. The means of implementation are generally these rights claimant forms, which relate to the mandate as irrefutable arguments that the banking system is wrongly intervening upon our affairs, our industry and commerce, to exploit us by a means which is inevitably terminal, and this is precipitated in artificial conditions which have inadvertently made it impossible for us to service these falsified, multiplied debts, and we are, as a consequence of that, we are educating ourselves. And we realize that a great crime has been committed against us, and we are insisting that it be ceased and reversed to every extent possible. And this is the means of doing it. Rights claimant forms and a mandate for mathematically perfected economy and absolute consensual representation. And with those interests in mind, it's important, I believe, that we refrain absolutely from inclusion or of any redundant argument or position or any conflicting argument or position whatsoever. Anyone who has a tendency to do so is effectively divorcing themselves from us, because I would attack it myself. And most of the people who claim that they have some argument to accomplish these objects have ultimately borrowed from my work, which was the original arguments for this on the internet, and 10 years before there was an internet, and all they've done is contribute to the state of confusion and to an ever more tenuous possibility that we will succeed by advocating the only irrefutable arguments for a proper resolution of our actual debts.
Mike, okay, well, part of the I'm sorry, sorry, Ivan.
Go ahead, Carl.
I just wanted to just follow up very briefly on that with what Mike's answer, and my, I won't say understanding, but certainly my viewpoint of how I'm learning, because I'm going over, Bills of Exchange Act, Bank Acts, and, these finance acts, the actual statutes and laws that they are relying on themselves. And my initial understanding, certainly from the Bills of Exchange, is that our promissory obligation, which becomes a promissory note, which you, of course, are referring to in the very beginning, that is what gets obfuscated into and misrepresented into a loan contract. And that is how the banks are acting. They're acting on that loan contract. So
it's not obfuscated into the loan contract. The loan contract is the very act that creates it. It's our compliance, unwitting compliance with a breach of trust in which money that has to be created as a consequence of a promissory obligation has been obfuscated into falsified debts to the bank subject to interest, which is how they would ever acquire any money ever to loan us if it was from their possession. But all those documents are, in my opinion, entirely irrelevant. You don't even want to go there. You don't even want to bring them up in a court of law. Why? Because they're all based on a falsified premise, and that is this obfuscation of the currency. They just assume that this money rightfully becomes possessed by the banking system if it isn't rightfully possessed from the very beginning, only as a matter of assumption, and that there's nothing warranted or justifiable about those assumptions. And so if you want to argue a trust law or the Federal Reserve Act or whatever, all you're doing is wasting air. I mean, I put myself in, and I mean I've been living in this position for many years. I mean, going way back into, as a young man in the late 60s and early 70s, I've been sitting in the judge's seat. How would I deal with this matter? And if somebody came into my court of law and he said, money's created out of thin air, I just dismiss that guy already, because he has no argument, and he's just revealed that to me. He has just exposed himself. Now, if he's going to cry about having a debt after having signed a contract, I want to make quick work of this, and I'm going to be down on him, that witness, like nothing, because that witness just wants to stall. He wants to look for this way out or that way out or another way out. The truth of the matter is, when every one of us went to a bank and we signed that contract which issued our promissory obligation, we did so with conscientious reservations. It's virtually impossible for a person to think that they should go to a bank and purportedly borrow money to buy a house. The banking system never produces anything, and yet when we borrow the principal, all of which never even existed at some time, and somehow it's come into existence, it's impossible for us to be truly affirmed in the idea that all this is justified, and that for mere paper, we are going to pay several times the principal for a home. We're going to pay 3 homes for a home or 4 homes for a home, something like that. We can't sit there and just liberally pen our name to that piece of paper as if we're entirely comfortable with the matter at hand. We have to think, why 3 homes? Why 4 homes? Why 2 homes for paper? What is it that justifies all this? We had a question mark in our mind when we did so. We had the idea that this was wrong, and yet we had no other alternative. You can't save enough money to purchase a home in a system in which you are exploited. And so it was either buy now or wait for the cost to escalate beyond all realm, of possibility. And we did so at some point, never feeling entirely comfortable about it, never knowing what the truth of the matter is of how money was created, and that's purposely never been disclosed to us. You have never read in any of those acts you've studied how money is actually created, because they don't want to disclose that to you. The fact that they don't want to disclose that to you, and that it's not in any of the acts that you studied, is evidence that it's a willful, conscientious crime against us. So all those details amount to somehow leaving us the impression that it's justified, but never justifying it. So what do you want to do? Do you want to argue your case on the obvious obfuscation of the currency, or do you want to bore the judge to literal death, trying to disprove an act which has been passed under the form of government which is supposed to exist, albeit it was passed by puppets of the banking system, who are the major contributors to every candidate on however many different sides of however many different aisles, Are you going to argue that that act is unwarranted when it's been passed, when it isn't the judicial branch's responsibility to reverse it on any other grounds but this unwarranted obfuscation of the currency? You don't want to go there. You're just making an extremely complicated affair out of something which in fact is very simple. Good Lord, how many monetary acts of any kind are there, banking acts, which divide banks into ostensible commercial and non-commercial categories, and place certain restrictions on one category versus the other? All of that's irrelevant. It's irrelevant to the judge. It's irrelevant to a jury. It's irrelevant to us, and it's irrelevant to the fact of the rightful state of your debts. And I say, never go there. Never go there. If you think that there's some defense in those matters by invalidating them when they've been passed by government, when they've never been overturned, when there isn't even an obvious public mandate against them, I say you're shooting yourself in the foot. I say you're shooting yourself in the foot every step of the way, and I say that the court is going to tire of that as a strategy, and as a strategy, it can't go anywhere. There's nothing in the Federal Reserve Act that itself proves the matter should be decided any other way. You have to introduce that. And it doesn't matter that the Federal Reserve Act contradicts you if you can prove that you're right. And the issue is the obfuscation of the currency. And one reason I've never written a book about that is because a paragraph covers it. You see, all these other books, Ellen Hodgson Brown, Bill Still, Stephen Zarlinga, Edwin Vieira, Ron Paul, all these people are just totally full of crap. We don't have circulatory inflation isn't causing our problem. We don't have circulatory inflation. We have an absence of money. Money isn't created out of thin air. It's created out of promissory obligations, And so all this is you can't solve the problem by spending the interest into circulation. The problem isn't that the interest doesn't exist in circulation. In fact, to pay the interest, all we do is restore the same circulation which isn't sufficient, supposedly, to pay the interest. So all these other things are irrelevant, and as soon as you throw them at the judges are not generally stupid people. Andrew Napolitano, for instance, I really like the guy on many accounts, but he's a Ron Paul supporter. He supports Austrian economics. He does not understand the issue. He won't ever respond to me. Something wrong with the guy. He's wrong, But the matter is still how he's wrong and what arguments will prevail. And that's the same matter, really. That's opposite sides of the same coin. And the only coin we have to play is the obfuscation of the currency. Stick to that, you win. If the courts will support us. And I say, don't take it to court, because the mandate, what you want is the mandate to accumulate momentum. More and more. We got 10,000 homes a day going into foreclosure for how many years now in just the United States? You know, I mean, I'm seeing camps between our tiny little town and Baker City, and it's still snowing here. You know, camps. It's not even legal to camp where these people are. The sheriff's going to have to go and convict and have them go away. They probably don't have enough gas to go away or enough money to buy gas to go away. They're so far out of town that they can hitchhike in town to do the last few times of shopping that they're ever going to perform in their lives. We have a dire situation on our hands here. Now, what we have to hope for is if this goes to court, we have good judges. We never offend them. We never insult their intelligence. We show them what they need to understand before these lawyers divert it to, oh, this preposterous man, you know, he read this crap on the internet somewhere, money's out of thin air, or they need to introduce the interest with the principal and everything would be wrong, and all of these things have already been disproven. Well, they have been disproven. They've been disproven by my work. My work inherently disproved them from the very beginning, because he was a proof of singular solution. So, you know, all those things are disproven by my work. I do not support anyone in going off on these other tangents, and I'm trying to help by apprising people of the negativity of it. You know, I mean, I know some really good judges, you know, people that I've seen them in court just a few times, incredible respect for how they handled matters. They saw right through every person in their court. They knew exactly what they were dealing with. There's no fooling these men. They're dealing with human degenerates every day of their lives. People are trying to put one scheme over each other, and that's all that, you know, ultimately they're going to see from humanity in their careers. They're going to see all these damn people who just had to screw each other into the ground. They have no idea of justice. The laws aren't good enough for me to give them, you know, the full justice that I can see. And there's a lot of problems in the world today. And then one day something comes into his court, and instead of giving the opposing lawyer for the bank the opportunity to say, oh, you got that dumb idea off the internet, so therefore you're a fool too, you know, and turn the thing into a circus. You start out with your original premises being declared in such a way that accounted for that lawyer eventually saying that, and that you steered clear of all the dumb things that have happened on the internet, which are all these things are happening by imposters. Everyone that's doing these things is losing. You know, I mean, one of the TNS hosts that's been in jail, they claimed, you know, they never lose. They knew more about money than I'd ever hoped to in the rest of my life, though they've probably spent no time at it all. The only thing that they had to say about money to me in our initial discussion was it's created out of thin air. They also said that they used to talk like me until they learned better, as if I was going to catch up with them at some time. And I mean, in the early 1980s, I produced computer models for the Reagan administration, which calculated that this system would fail at approximately 2010 AD. Now, why am I getting lectured by people like this? But you take that person in a court of law, and are they going to prevail saying that money's created out of thin air? No. You know, and what's happened? They lost their home. They said they told me they never lose. They lost their home. They were evicted. Why are they in jail? Because they tried to re-enter illegally. Okay? Now, that person was on the air conflicting with what I was teaching people, undermining what I had already taught people, turning people against me. Okay? And more than against me, which it doesn't matter that they turn people against me to me, you know, but that they turn people against the teaching that I'd worked so hard to give, you know, is the real matter here. Because what? That person had absolutely no credibility whatsoever.
Mike, there's a question one of the other guys wanted to ask. I don't know if you want to... Still there?
Yeah, I'm here.
No, I'm asking. I don't know if he wants to mention who it is.
I wanted to come in on that, Mike. I just wanted to say a few things about. First of all, it's not our debt. I think you've misunderstood the fundamentals of what we were trying to put across there.
I've heard, I've heard Ben, sort of recant that. So I don't know which side of the fence you guys are on, because earlier today somebody sent me a link that I saw you post, David, and I visited that, and it was still, it's not our debt. That's in the verbiage of the video. And I like what you guys are doing, but I think that's, I've already answered to it. But go ahead.
It's not our debt was created specifically for one point. Is the bank is paying back unsecured bondholders that bought bonds in a bank. And it's not our debt was referring to there is no legal obligation for the government to pay back that bit of debt. That's what we're referring to, and that's the only thing on that site that we're referring to when we say it's not our debt.
Well, on that count, I agree with you.
I think that's why. And we specifically separated it from the freedom from all debt and said it's not our debt because that is not our debt and there's no obligation for the government to pay it.
Well,
thus the injunction that we're putting in next week.
But if your injunction is going to hold water, it's going to have to address this obfuscation of the currency, because this is how the banking system assumes debts that it can't pay back as well. And you have to understand the differences between the central bank, which creates the money, which has nothing at risk and can only collect incredible profit, and the peripheral banks, which interface with the people, which become jeopardized by the possibility of the people persisting in servicing the accumulating sum of debt. Because those peripheral banks, ostensibly, they comply in the obfuscation, purportedly borrowing money from the central bank, which merely publishes further representations of it. Now, if you exercise that argument against this debt, I say you prevail, But my, at best then, as you explain it, that would be an unfortunate choice of words or title. And the thing that I see is I jump over into, to watch the video, and I admire what you're doing, and I'm behind you in defending these people. I wish I could be there myself. But what I see is that if that name, it's not our debt, is attached to further processing of mortgages, is totally inapplicable. It's totally to the discredit, because that's the usual connotation that a person is going to assume from that title. It's not our debt. And so I would change it immediately if it was me. I would change it immediately, and I would, and Ben even said there's plans to do this, and I understand that, and I encourage you to do that, because you do not want to give the idea to anyone, even somebody you're going to defend. You don't want them to say, oh, yeah, it's not our debt, because it is your debt. You signed a contract, and you can't just get a house for signing a piece of paper. No one's going to base a proper economy on that. And so, at best, what you're doing, if you persist in that name, is you're going to have to explain the difference to all these people that are going to come to you for their help, who you want to help. And that's going to be a waste of time. It gave the wrong impression. But if you explain
Mike,
this,
I ask you, on the It's Not Our Debt page, have you actually read it?
Actually, I have been there, but I wouldn't say that I spent enough time to study it. Ben's explanation and your explanation now suffice to me. I think you'd probably realize that if somebody came to you with a mortgage issue, that you do want to be careful about giving them the idea that it's not their debt. And
if somebody came to us and was talking to us, we wouldn't turn around and say it's not our debt.com. But regardless, I wanted to make that clear because I just felt that you'd misunderstood that.
No, I don't misunderstand it. I'm trying to give you the impression from the outside looking in, even having that explanation. When I go there, I still see that it's not ourdebt.com, and that that bothers me when I see it. If it was me looking for help, I would think I was in the wrong place. But what we want to do to rectify that is deal with it. Now, it's not our debt. You're talking about a debt that's restrictive. It's a particular debt assumed by a particular plateau of the banking system as a consequence of this obfuscation of the currency, which is this further accumulation of debt that happens that's inevitably terminal. And so, just as a matter of writing, I deal with this all day, every day. I would not use the debt there. I would use an expression of the particular debt that you're relating to so that it's clear and you're credible. But I would definitely never want to go to court. I would never want to associate that term with any video which was defending any other position of an actual debt, regardless of the fact that it's been obfuscated. I would never want that name associated to it because, just for instance, suppose I'm that sheriff, and Ben met me at the gate, and he did carefully and courteously and respectfully assert the conflicting positions that were executed by a single person or officer or purported authority. That's all good. But if I was a sheriff and I went online and I saw it's not our debt, I'm deprived of that. And I'm just saying we have to tighten up our approach to this so we leave no room for anyone to misconstrue our meaning, our intent, our means, our arguments. Never. I'm forced to look. I can't tell you how many times a day somebody notifies me of what's always a plagiarist of my work, and it's getting to fall in quality. In some cases, in exceptions, it's rising and morphing closer and closer to my work. But how much do I look at any of this work ever? If I see that the advocate claims that a debt doesn't exist, or that the problem is that we've abandoned the gold standard, or that we've adopted fractional reserve policy, or that the debt doesn't exist, or that money's created out of thin air, or we're suffering circulatory inflation, all of these things are marks of imposters. One fault and I'm out of there. I've had it. I'm asked to look at these things, and the problem is that any of these faults are consistent with one thing and one thing only, and that is that somebody has not resolved what these things are and how to deal with them. And so it's absolutely impossible for me, for instance. You won't find a moment in my life, going back to when I was 16 years old in 1968, that I ever said we can't pay the interest, that I even loosely implied it was possible we can't pay the interest because it doesn't exist in circulation, or that money is created out of thin air, or that we suffer circulatory inflation and that's the cause of our problems. These things are all falsehoods that pretenders have come up with. And this is a vital world problem now. And anyone who recognizes that feels the weight that what they're doing is right and righteous and defensible and entirely not just deserving to prevail, but that it will inevitably prevail ultimately in human history. And anything else is to compromise this and compromise the credibility of us. Like I say, if I'm sitting in the chair, if I'm the judge, and you bring up any of these things in my court, or the other lawyer for the bank, and I'm not trying to put you down, David. I'm just explaining how important this is in every possible turn of these affairs. If that lawyer for the bank goes to your site and sees that your material is displayed on pages for itsnotourdebt.com, he's going to turn that into the worst imaginable discredit in a court of law against you. You know, he's going to make it look at least like we should all think that these people are only here because they think that the debt can't exist. You know, and and that's something that we absolutely have to eradicate from our behavior, from our thinking. The only way we get it out of our thinking is by realizing it's not the fact. You know, now in the case of paying back debts that banks have assumed that aren't our debts, you're absolutely right. You know, you're absolutely right. But in truth, that actually applies to the whole sum of debts as well. But yet, we assumed them. And so, except for those debts that the banking system is multiplying upon the peripheral banks who are trying to pull off further shenanigans of trading evidence of debt amongst each other, you know, sloppily securitize all these mortgages to promote this house bubble in the United States, and the prices keep going up and up and up and up and up, and nobody's creditworthiness is really truly validated. And okay, so we get all those debts and we get the initial payments on it, and then we sell the debts for far more than we're likely to acquire over the lifespan over which they'll likely be serviced, which is an interesting thing to think about, because if you sell them for more than you can collect over, you know, some term of time, and somebody else is responsible for collecting it, you made out like a bandit. And you never, being as that was your original intention, and you had a market for it, you were never taking on any real risk at all, except that the system collapsed before you pulled off your scam, you know. And if that had happened, well, you'd have been stuck, but you would have been holding paper debt, and you would have just started over again like everybody else. So you would tend to think of that as, you know, well, nothing ventured, nothing lost there. So fine, I either make out like a bandit, or I go down the drain with everyone else. Anyway, it's not just a feeling. I take it to be a fact that we have to be impeccable in our manner. And one thing I really like about what you and Ben were doing is your manner is excellent for facing the system. That is, you show no disrespect. You're attempting to be accountable, and it's a great start to all this. But I see it, you know, when it gets in a court of law, you want to distance yourself from that domain name as far as you can get.
Just want to come in there. Just have a look at the video I posted there later on after we're finished. Okay. We've already changed our name. We changed it earlier on today.
I did notice it in the tags and everything. I mean, good, good, but get rid of all of it. Get rid of all of it.
Well,
I mean, right there.
Tell you what our name is. Do you know what our new name is?
Well, I see one on a button immediately. I just clicked on it. Uploaded by Freedom from All Debt.
Yeah, well, don't worry. That's just a YouTube account. I'm changing that. We're basically called peopleforeconomicjustice.com.
Right. Well, I've been People for Mathematically Perfected Economy since 1975. And really what I'd like to see is you join us rather than form another group, too. I mean, what I'm seeing is everybody, their brother, their sister, and their pet is forming yet another and another and another and another group. And this is divisive. I mean, ultimately, if you supported these arguments, well, it's only right that you become one of us. And I've been doing this for 44 years. And people listen to me from the very beginning, and this is documented as well. So it's a long proven solution that survived scrutiny and argument, and it's prevailed in the most adverse places, which are many of which are raised by other divisive entities such as the Ron Paul campaign. Those are some of the most vicious places for proof of monetary solution a person can imagine. But anyway, if cause came for a revolution here in the United States, I'm in the States, and if everyone decided they'd have their own personal revolution, we would have never had the union that prevailed in a revolution. And every day I hear about positive money or real currency or IVAMU or Bitcoin or Bebo currency. It's a daily thing. And all these people do is they don't even have my arguments. Then they eventually cover their butt by creating some of them. And a lot of these people are outright criminals. Nisara, for instance, is an early plagiarizer of my work since the first days of the formal internet. And they originally argued, a compromise of my work to dramatically reduce interest rates. They're founded by a fellow who's jailed for fraud and died in jail, and they're carried out on by his accomplice, a woman who goes by the name Dove of Oneness, and she's no monetary reformist at all, but they've got people on everything that I release. They incorporate. And if you go through history, it's all there on their pages. And if you look at all these other sites, same thing. Well, these people and many other people who follow them think that, well, that's great. We have all these solutions to choose from. There's always been one solution, and what's happened is we're divided among all these other entities, all of whom have donate buttons, and and they're looking for glory to promote their book, and on and on and on. But there's no unity. It's a continual process of compromisation and division, and these people can't even articulate what the problem is. I mean, a couple of weeks ago, I was on the air with, Roger Hayes of purported Lawful Bank, and Roger, had a discussion with me a couple of years ago, and all he does is more and more adamantly defend this proposition, which was originally a multi-level marketing scheme. You could open up a branch of the bank yourself. You could share in its profits, and more, it's morphed into my work. And he's running around charging people to speak to them, giving the worst rendition of my ideas, and he can't even articulate them. And what's he going to do after our online debate? He's going to morph his what he's saying more and more into what I've been saying for 44 years, but he can hardly prove it. He's hardly standing for solution. He's telling his audiences that creation of money does not belong in private hands. It belongs in government. And then he goes to create a bank to create it in private hands. And it does belong in private hands, but not of banking. We are the issuers of money. So what is Roger Hayes doing? People think, well, it's a step ahead, or as advocates write me and take my time, troubling me to explain to them how a separate bank doesn't, or an alternate currency can't solve our problems, because the initial currency continues to multiply debt upon us. Few people are subscribing to this, if any. They're not putting money into this bank. If they do, they're stupid. They're going to be, you watch, if they do, Roger Hayes is even going to jail. But it doesn't solve our problems. He's doing the very things. I have recorded presentations he's given, and with their videos of him actually saying these things. He doesn't even understand what's wrong with money. His audience knows more about it than he does. They ask a question, and instead of answering it, he says, well, if you really want to understand money, watch the video, Money is Debt, which is another plagiarist, Paul Greenone, who's just an artist. You see, and so misunderstands my work that he thinks the problem with money is that it's a debt, not that the unwarranted imposition of interest imposes an implicit obligation to maintain a vital circulation, which multiplies the initial sums of falsified debt into terminal sums of falsified debt. That's not the problem, that it's a debt. Debt is what enables us, a newlywed couple, for instance, to own a home that they can afford to pay for as they consume of it. It gives the producer of the home a market they would never have otherwise. Debt is useful. It's the only thing that monetizes money, and it's the only thing that even makes money redeemable, that it actually represents an enforceable obligation. So we need unity. We don't need further. I'd rather you became one of us, and you were a representative of people for mathematically perfected economy. After all, are you against mathematically perfected economy?
In truth, I don't know enough about it. I haven't had the time to sit down and read all the paperwork to understand everything. I don't want to make a statement on something that I don't know about.
Well, that's my ultimate goal. I would like to see. We have to have unity. We have to have unity. You understand that. We all understand.
Of course,
that,
yeah.
Yeah,
definitely. And the thing is, look, we've been so busy lately that I haven't had the time to go ahead and look at it, but I will.
Right. And that happens to all of us who are in a position here where we're attempting to accomplish it. I haven't done anything myself today, and I got up a few hours early to get an early start so I could, and so this happens to all of us. That's why Vin isn't part of this discussion. I'm sure he's helping people right now as we speak, and probably that's why Ben's not part of the discussion. But we do have to have unity, and we do need to cross our T's and dot our I's before we go out there and shoot ourselves in the foot. And I don't mean to bring you down or discourage you by raising this, it's not our debt issue, or freedom from all debt. Those things will be used against you. I guarantee it. Absolutely guarantee it. And they will be used with great force and ability to succeed, because people will see that that's not the issue. And that will yank the rug out from under you. You cannot give them anything. You have to be absolutely correct in everything that comes out of your mouth or off the tips of your fingers.
Yeah, no, definitely.
I just want to jump in there to comment about people. Sometimes people asking how we're going to put this across, or how we're going to explain it so that other people understand it. I think it's like I get a lot of replies from people that I kind of push to start learning MPE, and what they usually say, pretty much most of the people say that they started learning is once they start learning it, you understand it better, and then like you wouldn't have this question, how we're going to put it across, because you're going to understand it and you're going to understand why it's important, and how you're going to put it across, and why the words are used, are the words that used. So just we need to start. Basically, all you need to do is just start learning. And once you start the process, you will, you understand it. And it's not necessarily going to take you a week or 2 weeks or a month. If you just, just give it a go, you would see things starting to fall into place. And another comment I want to make as well is to David. If you come into people and you're saying that, just that a small paragraph you posted in there. That you just in the end of it, that you're trying to stop our government enslaving us and paying any more our children's money and all that stuff. What I got from people that I spoke with, like serious people, like people into business, like kind of middle class, up, lower class, slightly above middle class, they all come back with the same thing. Serious people, they will always ask you, they will question you about your proposed solutions, and if you can't explain to them about MPE, then they sense that you have no solution. So it's really difficult. I'm not sure, you might have sensed it as well. In some people you spoke with, they kind of question you. They have that look in their eyes when you talk to them about this stuff. They kind of agree with you on the part that there's a problem, but if you don't present them a proper solution, then they won't they'll have reservations. So it's important to understand and explain the solution, because you can, even if you say that there's this mathematically perfected economy, but you can explain it, they would still have this kind of, is it really, how does it work exactly, so you lose credibility. Whether if you know the arguments, then you gain automatic credibility. Like I just spoke with a guy today, and, I have this new process that I'm doing now. I'm raising the issue of mathematically perfected economy and allowing the person to start the conversation. So I start with the first question he has, and then I give him the answer. Then he comes up with the next question. Then I give him the answer to that and explain about the process. Then the third, the fourth, and I actually broke the whole thing down to him in a space of 20 minutes today. And he was just, he was just in shock. He was chasing me for links and everything, and didn't put any effort. All I'd done was explain. It was mention MP in the first place. That's it. And that he's going to be paying much less than he paid, than he, might pay now if you would to assume a mortgage.
Great, Ivan. Thanks so much for that. The other thing is, I've already been through this in a different way, in an IRS audit that I contested the constitutionality of the currency on these grounds and prevailed. And the IRS hasn't touched me since, knock on wood. But I wouldn't promote to anyone to attempt the same exercise, because I don't believe that anyone else could have pulled it off the way that I did. But as it was left, I was allowed to dictate the report in what should have been a 10 or 15 minute audit that went for 4 hours. And I was allowed, actually appreciated, to dictate the report where I insisted to be taken to Supreme Court to challenge the constitutionality of the currency and the taxation system as multiplied, falsified indebtedness on the behalf of government to the central banking system. And evidently they don't want to see me in court. I'm not saying or even suggesting in the least way that we wouldn't end up in court. I believe we will. I believe that they're going to want to cross their T's and dot their I's before they take us to court, because the whole banking system will come down on the first trial. Now, people who I have coached on this have deviated from the plan. You can download it from perfectedeconomy.org/FTP. If you go into my TNS radio broadcasts and the MP3s of the single programs, you'll find my interview of Michael Tillinger in South Africa, for instance. Michael wanted to claim the debt shouldn't exist, and he's in trouble. So I've got some material in front of me here. I'm not going to mention where this comes from. But I think it's a good idea to just give you a slight example of my perspective of these things as I see here. And this is a letter from a law firm representing a bank against an appellant who's subject to a foreclosure here. I'm just going to read here. I've just got this one, and I out that it's let's see. It's just one of many, and I don't think I probably have to spend much time with this to give you an idea. I'll just read it and comment on it as I go. Your further communications allege that there had been no acknowledgement beyond the received and read receipts. Since our letters expressly acknowledge receipt by our client, that is the bank, of your communications, this statement was incorrect. Whatever's going on there, we don't know explicitly from just that much, but whatever's going on there is a matter of irrelevance. You see, when you introduce anything else but this obfuscation of its currency and the fact that it imposes these artificial conditions on us, which are inescapable and which precipitate an inability, an eventual artificial inability to continue servicing debts because of the multiplication of debt into an terminal sum of insoluble debt, if you deviate from that, all you do is open up whatever Pandora's box, and that's what lawyers are going to love you for, because you're giving them something else to quibble over, as if you're in the wrong, and evidently they're in the right. So they say, I'm not sure I picked out the best ones here. Let me just open one here. They're attempting to get this person to correspond only with the bank. Let's see. Sorry, I meant to. And that's all that I see that's going on here is quibbling. Firstly, this is a letter from the respondent. Firstly, you mentioned in your communication a letter, I'm shocked, you say was dated the 1st of February 2012, sent by you, 2 days after the initial letter sent from me to the bank. Let me say that the letter, all this is just quibbling over who can send what to who and all this. And I thought I'd discover this really quickly. But the lawyers begin by asserting that you, the appellant or defendant, are about to claim arguments which you've learned over the internet, all of which have been disproven already. Well, we're all here. Have you ever heard anyone disprove this obfuscation of the currency? Most people even claim to understand it to me, and I was speaking to the wee hours of the morning last night with another fellow up in Canada who even had names for ideas that come from my work and my work only. People send me information all the time that supposedly comes from another person who 18 whatever, came up with the same idea, and I read it and no, it's not even close to the same thing, and we go round and round and round about this. But people even claim to have names for things that are the product of my work, and yet they can't, in their own words even, articulate the obfuscation of the currency. You see? So all of this pretension doesn't get us anywhere. what we need to do is stick to the matters at hand. And that's all this communication is about. It's trying to get this person to communicate directly with the lawyers only. And then it says, despite these instructions, you have continued to communicate with the bank directly. We hereby acknowledge receipt by our client of your further communications sent by email on February 23rd, 2012, and by your subsequent voice message. This stuff is like, excuse me, it's like if you had a patent application and all you wanted to do is argue whether you'd paid the fees or not, or whether the fees were the right fees, or something like this. This is all irrelevant. Your further communications alleged that there had been no acknowledgement beyond the received and read receipts. Since our letters expressed acknowledged receipt by our client of your communications, this statement was incorrect. Well, big deal. We confirm that all communications with respect to this matter are to be with our office only and not with the bank directly. So they're trying to, get this to run this way. And yet, these guys are lawyers. Do you believe that they understand monetary justice so well that they have any idea about this obfuscation of the currency at all? Absolutely not. And what they're running into on the internet is all these preposterous assertions, which are obviously wrong. Money created out of thin air. Think about going into a court of law and claiming, as Ron Paul, who's running for president, constantly tells us money is created out of thin air. What does that mean? How does Ben Bernanke even sit there in his chair and take it from Ron Paul? When Ron Paul says, oh, you're just creating money out of thin air, so we have this excess of money, and that's why our money is devalued. And, they never even bother to stop and say, okay, well, do the math, Ron. How did it end up that way? But they know that this is a preposterous assertion. It appears from your communications that, unfortunately, you have been exposed over the internet. Here we go. In seminars, by word of mouth or otherwise, to a sham debt elimination scheme. Can we be associated with this? We have to cut this kind of argument off before it can possibly happen. Such schemes originate from the United States or Canada and incorrectly assert that consumer debtors can follow such schemes to eliminate their indebtedness without paying it. Well, they're right in the assumption that if there is a debt, it cannot be eliminated, and that it is an obligation and an enforceable obligation to pay it. But they're telling you right there, you're wrong, whatever you're trying to do. We don't even have to know what it is. We already know that all these things are wrong. And why do they have this mistaken opinion? Do you think they've been to my site? Do you think they can prove an alternate solution for inflation or deflation, or an alternate solution for irreversible multiplication of falsified indebtedness by interest? No, they can't. No one ever has. And I've been up against too many thousands of people who have tried, to think that they have the slightest idea. Such schemes, they go on to say, continue to be discredited by court decisions made in several provinces. And that's my experience as well. You deviate from these arguments, you're crying that money's created out of thin air, you never lose, and you're going to keep your house because you're free. And that's what this other TNS host was claiming to me. And they lost their house. There was nothing credible about anything they had to say. They claimed that money's created out of thin air. They repeated a preposterous thing, and they lost their house. And they claim to me they never lose. Well, all I see is that everyone that's trying anything else is in trouble. It's a matter of time to their end if they haven't suffered the end already. So it's a matter of whether or not we want to pick up these arguments, which they're not even referring to. The cases referred to below may be accessed at the Canadian Legal Information Institute, CanLII, website address at canlii.org, or we will provide copies upon request. In other words, all these things have already been shut down in court, and we'll provide copies of the cases to you. So, question is whether or not they can account for the obfuscation of the currency. They don't have a case. The Bank of England claims in their Freedom of Information Act inquiry response to us that the question is unintelligible, that it can't be understood, and ultimately they said it would cost too much money to answer it. They said they were allotted something like $1,400, and they bill their time at $20 per hour to research such a matter, and they figured that it would cost more than £1,400 to answer the question. Therefore, they refused to, and that was the end of our case, and that's their final reply. Now, we all know that if there was a lawful consideration given up, which would, in fact, then comprise a debt to the bank, that there would obviously be data and processes which prove so, because there is no way to justify banking's obfuscation of our currency, which is banking. So there's no way even to justify banking or the central banking systems of the world if that hadn't been proven already or justified already, and that information would exist. If this person served as an officer of the Bank of England, in fact, if in their career they had ever justified banking for their own conscience, they would know the answer to the question already. The fact that it doesn't exist, the fact that they have to look for it in a body of material which is never going to have it because it doesn't want us to know how money is truly created out of our promissory obligations and falsified into debts to the banking system subject to interest. They don't want us to understand that. That's why the information doesn't exist, and that's why they didn't answer the question.
Mike, I just want to add another small thing. If somebody, and people who are listening, or people who are in the call at the moment, if you have, say, a question about certain individual or a name or a term of a solution or something like that, and you want to just do a small research on it, what I suggest is to do is if you type in Google, and I'll just put it there in the Skype chat box, and basically you put a term you're looking for, like say for example Ron Paul, which will probably bring a lot of results, and then after that you put space, and then you put site semicolon perfecteconomy.com. That's the old site where all the articles are. And there's been I think Mike and the other people involved pretty much answered any relevant question that is raised with regards to MPE. So I think if you want to research before you ask questions, that's a good place to start if you do it like that, because you can find a lot of information there.
Thanks again, Ivan. Jim was his initial proposition is that they might need to rely on me as an expert witness in their case, and that of course is something I'm perfectly willing to do. What's more difficult for initial people to grasp, particularly if they haven't even got a basic idea of the foundations of this thing, which is really all there is to it. I mean, but it's difficult for people to understand that over the years, I've literally, it's been so many years I can't even recall that I have been asked a question that I haven't answered already, generally hundreds, if not thousands of times. And the scope of these questions include such difficult issues as how would you finance gold, for instance, under mathematically perfected economy? After all, all mathematically perfected economy is an eradication of interest and an obligatory schedule of payment retiring principal at the rate of consumption of the or depreciation of the related property. So people ask me, well, how do you depreciate gold? Gold never depreciates. Indeed, it doesn't. But the reason they ask the question is they never did what Ivan did to understand mathematically perfected economy, which is to look at its glossary of terms. And what I mean by a rate of consumption or depreciation over the lifespan of the related property is, I am simplifying it a tiny bit, but because I use the terms regularly and rely upon the dependence of their definitions, it's to be understood that what I mean is over the proprietary determinate lifespan of the related property. And so if you look up proprietary determinate lifespan, which you would discover if you even looked up lifespan, you would find that it's a complex legal definition of property which relates a lifespan to a term over which it can be financed or monetized more properly under this system. In other words, when we monetize gold, say for instance for a hardware producer for computer technology, lots of gold contacts are used, and say it's a startup firm and the engineers have got a business plan and formed a company to produce a product, and it has a market and they have a better product and they qualify to monetize it under the rules and regulations of our common monetary infrastructure. The gold is monetized. So how much gold they need is monetized, no more, for no other purpose. And it's monetized for how long they need to monetize it for through the production and marketing of the product. After which, if it's monetized further, it would be monetized over the proprietary determinate lifespan of the resultant product. So the definition of the terms actually explain the answer to that question if you ever look them up in my work. But that's how thorough it is. I mean, people think, well, if this guy's always saying, well, you retire principal at the rate of consumption of the related property, but gold is never consumed. Gold is, it's a perpetual resource. Yes, we need to take it off of what we put it on before to use it again, but still, we have the gold, So, but that's how it's all explained. And I regularly get calls from people who are even, great intellectuals who think that, maybe there might be areas of this that have to be worked out or something like that. And they ask a question. I mean, I actually answered that question live, real time, unprepared, and no idea what questions were going to be submitted. And, in explaining things, I broadcast on one of my TNS radio shows, I broadcast the answer to that question. How do you finance gold under mathematically perfected economy? Now that question was submitted by a person high up in an formative major political party here in the United States, and they were very interested in my ideas, and they put this one person on the questions to submit them to me, and and I did that live. People tend to underestimate, how comprehensive all this is. Because they just think that a person just decides these things, they're matters of opinion or something like that. And that's not the case at all. I mean, even the computer models that I provided the Reagan administration were so comprehensive that they projected how much interest rates had to be reduced over the entire lifespan of the system until terminal failure, and did that as a necessary exercise of duly projecting the maximum possible lifespan of any economy based on interest-bearing debt. I mean, all of the numbers, they hit it right on the money. And that sounds maybe phenomenal or even far-fetched, but when you understand that this obfuscation imposes this implicit obligation to maintain a vital circulation, it's really actually simple, basic math. And what happens is at a given interest rate, debt continues to multiply out until it compromises the solubility of the system. We approach terminal failure at that interest rate. So what do? You ratchet down the interest rates. What do people do in responding to those conditions? They ratchet down the interest rates. Yes, they might decide an arbitrary amount, whereas the formulas that I devised to do so do a highly intelligent job of it. But the reason that they're doing that is to do a credible job of projecting the maximum possible lifespan of any economy based on interest-bearing debt. But all those models are doing is borrowing the principal and interest back into circulation that we're paying out of circulation in order to persist in whatever targeted circulations. And generally the Federal Reserve asks those to increase something like 2% per year. So anyway, and the other thing is people think, we have to have a model of this. We have to prove it. You can plug 0% interest rates in those same models, and guess what? You have an immutable currency and a perpetually sustained system. Period.
It's gone quiet. Are we still on?
Yeah, it looks like we might have dropped off there for a second there. I don't know how much you guys missed.
No, I heard you right up to that last second.
Okay, well, that pretty much covers the initial points. I don't know that there's much sense in going deeper into any particular area unless somebody's ready for that. But really, I would say study the mandate.
Mike, have I got the mandate? Have you sent it to me?
Let's see, who am I hearing now? Is that Jim?
Jim. Yeah.
Yeah, I sent that to you, Jim.
Okay. I don't know how I missed it.
Well, I'll send it to you again.
Is it on this? No, it's on your other.
Oh, it would. I believe it was at the tail end of our initial discussion.
Okay. I'll leave it. I'll find it. If you've sent it to me, I'll find it.
Okay.
Thanks, mate.
Okay. Well, text me if you don't have it or you can't find it, and I'll send you another copy. It doesn't take long to do it.
All right. Okay. Thanks.
Great. Anybody else with anything for now?
Actually, the only thing that I can think of, Mike, is obviously there are a number of people, as you mentioned earlier, that are already in the state of foreclosure or are thinking about challenging the banks in one way or another, because it's getting to that point now, or well past that point, to be honest, where we have to do something. More and more people are very, very aware of the, let's say, the misrepresentation of the contracts at the very beginning, which of course is I said it before too, obfuscation of the currency and so on. But it's how we proceed from now on to deal with it. Of course, those that feel knowledgeable enough, how can they now proceed against any of their banks or lawyers? Should they just deal specifically with the bank? Should they send them the mandate and say, I want to renegotiate the contracts?
Yeah, but basically, if anyone wants to act now, they're going to have to follow the pattern of this group. And that, if anyone in this group chooses to follow it, which is to exercise the mandate as I prescribed, you're going to have to declare you're a signatory. So in the copies you provide to these people, sign your name to it, And there you have a document claiming your arguments. You can cite them by section. You can read them in a court of law. You can read them to the sheriff when he appears on your property to evict you. You can explain these matters to them, and I highly recommend that people follow, the demeanor that Ben Gilroy and David Brown here have pursued in dealing with the sheriff in Ireland, and the what do you call the guard there, David?
Gardy.
Gardy, yeah. Remember, in the end, these people are performing jobs, and they may be way on the wrong side of rectitude, if not the law. They may believe that the law is on their side. They will generally have a simplistic idea of all this. They don't have any idea of the sleight of hand. If you go to church, people talk about the money changers almost every day in church, everywhere in the world, and yet ask somebody what are the money changers, and they cannot tell you. The only way they can possibly answer that question is to explain this obfuscation of the currency. And people just assume that it's good enough to hear it. They don't articulate it themselves. And if you tried to teach it to your children, you'd find you mastered it in no time at all. It's really what all this revolves around. We're solving that. But for people to try this now, they're going to have to use the mandate. My problem is I'm one person, and every day of my life is taken. I'm not bitching it. Don't think I'm saying anything negative against any of you or anybody else about this, but so much of my time is being demanded that I can't get at my work any longer. And basically, the website that we're putting together hosts the mandate, allows you to sign it electronically, has the rights claimant forms for you to exercise them, has the instructions for these rights claimant forms, and it's as that is a unit to resolve your situation. And this doesn't apply simply to the fact that you're in foreclosure and you're about to get evicted or you're suffering bankruptcy. No, this is to exercise to rectify the system. We all have to do this. In fact, the mandate is even holding those who don't sign the mandate accountable for the ramifications of their actions, which is to pay their debts so that they're not imposed upon the rest of us. And to pay them immediately, to resolve them, so it doesn't make government impossible to sustain, just for example, and it doesn't place the deficits upon the rest of us in one way or another, however that may be, So if people want to do something, they have to exercise this mandate. And they have to quit splitting into further groups claiming that they're doing it. Every day of my life, I'm answering to misconceptions, which are proliferated by plagiarists and pretenders, 11th hour imposters who don't have the answers to the questions. It's a day in and day out thing. I spent hours with a person yesterday who's trying to get me in front of Ron Paul, who knows him personally, who has recently established a greater probability than ever than Ron Paul will finally meet me and listen to me, and will be held accountable for his positions. But I can practically guarantee you it won't happen. And the reason is these people, they have things wrong with them. They just want to be president or something. A person who says the things that Ron Paul says can't even truly be feeling the real weight of the matters at hand. This is a kind of a thing you do not dare stick your foot in it if you don't know you're right, because we have to do this right. We have to have unity, not just in a country, but around the world. So my time is a problem. The other thing is, because there are days and days and days in a row where I don't have a minute to spend on the work at hand. I guarantee you, while I'm having this discussion, there's all kinds of other things that are piling up that I'm going to have to catch up to, and it'll be lucky if I go to bed late this night and I even type a few sentences out of tens of thousands of words that I need to have perfect, because they're your arguments to go to court, you know. So the other thing is, this website has tremendous functionality and hosting requirements, and it's a technological achievement in itself. But you know, Mark Giles is offered to host it, and we're going to, you know, Mark is going to be the host unless something else happens. But we're doing this on a shoestring, and if it works, if we're even able to take the signatures, if this thing goes viral without it breaking, we'll be fortunate. Because it's got to take, I mean, the basic numbers on it, it's got to take like 10,000 signatures a second for sustained periods of time. That's registering 10,000 2 kilobyte SQL records a second. The stress of that kind of workload is practically unheard of. I can't name another site that even comes close to executing successfully those kinds of processes, and the kinds of costs that imposes on a domain, or generally, I mean, the bids that I have to host this range from $250,000 to $500,000 a year, and I don't have that money, and nobody's stepping forward. You know, I mean, people could make this easier, and this has become, I mean, it's a one-man job. The code that I have written in just the about approximate year that I have in creating the website is more than most people write in an entire career. It's over 1 million lines of code. Now, that workload alone is more than even generally pretty sophisticated IT people can comprehend. You know, that's an awful lot of software development for one person, and that's just 1 year of my life. You know, and that's not finished, and I need to finish it. And if I had finished it, the mandate would be live right now. It's finished. I've decided it's going to be in a transitional state. Because there are things that I recently took out of it in correspondence with a number of attorneys, solicitors, and barristers and whatnot, you know, different parts of the world, who wanted me to tame it down a little bit because of it was prescribing, you know, minutia of security measures, for instance, and functionality for elections, which are verifiable by every citizen. You know, I mean, this thing is deep, and these things have to happen because we will be denied representation otherwise. And even if we made some ground against this beast that we're up against, that would be temporary, and we'd lose it, and we'd lose worse, you know, to a worse position than now, even because, you know, they have to entrench themselves against us. We have to be denied representation to suffer this obfuscation of the currency, and that's really what we're up against. So, you know, I'm terribly resentful of all the other sites which are created on a daily basis. I mean, I hear about so many every day. It isn't even funny. You can't even keep up with it. I have terabytes of material, you know, on plagiarists, and I mean they're mindlessly trying to repeat my ideas, and they're so sloppy. They don't even come close to expressing vital things in the only way that they mean something and imply, you know, what we can do about these things. So as I continue to say, you know, we're our own worst enemies. But as far as doing this goes, I'm one person, and I'm doing all that I can do, and I'm regretful myself every day. I'm beside myself because I can't get this thing done, and I've dropped out of sight many times, and it doesn't work. I've just got too much stress on my time to spend the time and the quality time, particularly, that you need to. I mean, every day you start over again. You try and keep your brain around a million lines of functional software code and leave it for months at a time and come back to it and even know where you left off. I mean, there's so much backtracking to do under these conditions. It's just incredible. It's almost impossible. And we could have been doing these things many years ago. We're all waiting to the last moment till it's practically too late, and it's a prayer and a hope that we succeed in these things. And that's the wrong thing to do too, But we are where we are, and we can only go forward, and I'll get this done as fast as I can. Meanwhile, we need to be all on the same page. We need to be uniform in our approach. These are pilot efforts. If they're done right, then we have a test. If they're done wrong, we have further discredit to monetary reform to contend with, and that'll be a bad thing.
For sure.
Mike, I just wanted to add another thing. For people who willing to try this, so all they need to do is get in touch with yourself or with myself, or with people on TNS who can forward them to ourselves, and then I think you would probably agree that they don't necessarily need to master the facts of all the different intricacies of how to implement the implementation and how different things are financed. What they really need to master is the faults. And the fact that we don't borrow money from the bank. The bank is only publishing evidence of our obligations to each other. So there's no debt to the bank. We actually have an outstanding obligation to fulfill. So the only thing we can do really is to refinance the debt, because the system is in terminal failure, and it's inherent. So it's going to fail. So that's the only responsible thing we can do. So we present these things to the judge, explain that there is no commensurable, that the banks don't give up anything of value. There's no lawful commensurable consideration to the debts they falsify.
Lawful consideration commensurable to the debts they falsify to themselves. Yeah, and I mean, it seems like that's something you could say a different way, but there's no better, more accurate, and compact terminology for it.
I wasn't trying to say it differently.
I know you're not. You're saying this very well. I'm just saying that for the other people, because you put everything into perspective. All I would add to, I would say what Ivan's just said in another way, is what you need to do is you really need to put yourself in the judge's seat. And you need to forget about all the things that you think you know about monetary rectitude or reform or what's wrong with the system or what may or may not be wrong with all the laws and corrupt governments and all that. You need to sit in the chair of the judge, and you need to examine your case. And you need to examine it under the scrutiny of a good judge first. And you need to think about how to progress into that case. You need to think about how you could be taken away from the course and strategy that you need to pursue. You need to think about how, in every case, you need to react to that. And you will find that in contriving your responses to every possible situation you can be confronted with, and that's the only preparation that there is. But you'll find if you do that, you will be reteaching yourself over and over again the vital principles, and they will become ever more clear to you as you go. And you need to account for all that. Once you've done that with a good judge, Now you have to imagine a worse judge and a worse judge, and you need to account for every kind of condition that can be thrown at you until you're in front of the worst judge that's imaginable. One that won't listen to reason, one that won't recognize the fundamental principles of justice. The worst case imaginable. And you have to get yourself to a situation where you will prevail. And this isn't going to be by sitting around. This means going to work. You know, you have to go to work. It's like, suppose your goal in life was to be an Olympic caliber sailor. You know, if you don't learn the right-of-way rules, you don't even belong on the course. You know, there is no way for you to even survive a regatta, you know. But until you master the behavior of wind and the sea and how to strategize what in sailing are called tactics, how to be first at the start, race after race after race, regardless if there's 180 top caliber sailors on the same starting line with you. How do you get first place off the start every time? How are you first to the weather mark? By shortening the course, by understanding the wind, by projecting the pattern that's going to occur in that day. You have to be able to account for all of it. You aren't what you want to be unless you do the work, and there isn't going to be any other way to get there. You can't go to court with a shortcut going, money's created out of thin air.
Yeah, and there's this urgency, you know, with people who deal with mortgages. Some people, you know, have officials visiting. So I think, you know, I would say that although it might seem difficult, but if we start explaining to people that this is the ultimate argument they want to pursue, it doesn't take much. You know, all it takes is just for people to start. And once people start, you know, I'm sure people are different. You know, some will catch it quicker, some will catch it, you know, will take some time. But we are here to help. You know, you can contact Mike, you can contact me, you can contact other people. You know, you can contact people on TNS. And you know, get in touch with us and be added to the discussion. And if you have any specific questions, then you know we'll be able to help. But what I don't specifically agree with, and this is just me personally, is looking for other solutions. And I won't mention which ones specifically, but looking for other solutions. Temporarily, they're going to postpone it, and then maybe you'll start looking for it, because MPE and the mandate can postpone it and arrest it just as immediately as anything else, if not quicker. The only thing we need to do is just master the arguments and not be looking for, you know, quick shortcuts. Like, you know, like you just said,
in
Mike.
fact, if that's, again, very well said. In fact, I would say Ivan would be a really good person to, you know, to contact about these things, because, you know, I need to finish the site and the material. And that's more than one man's work. But Ivan really has his brain around this, and that's a recent development. He's a good example of how far you can go, and you know, this isn't as if it's personal. We're friends, but you know, I'm not trying to. I haven't really recruited Ivan, or this is a separate person from the other side of the earth who's, you know, evaluated the other things out there, and, you know, and realizes themselves that these aren't matters of opinion. They're nothing of the kind. This is mathematics. You know, when somebody defines inflation and deflation as increases or decreases in circulation per represented property or goods and services or whatever you want to say, I prefer the former. You know, it's obvious. There's one and one only solution for inflation and deflation, and that is to maintain a circulation which is always equal and fully disposable to represented property. You know, and there's one way to do that, and one way to do that only that is just, and that is an obligatory schedule of payment, retiring principal at the rate of consumption of the related property. And it doesn't take a lot of work to understand. That's a fact. I mean, that's as simple as it gets. But if you went around the banking industry or law or politics and you asked a congressman, for example, or a banker or whatever, how do you solve inflation and deflation? Well, you get a variety of answers. Many would tell you can't, and it's true you can't under this obfuscation of the currency because at least it can't be fully dedicated to its purpose of representation. More and more is dedicated to servicing debt as opposed to sustaining the industry and commerce or representing our production out of a given circulation. So, it isn't difficult to understand that there's a singular solution for all the matters at hand. In truth, I don't know. I think myself, there's single pages of my work, which, like my parable of perfect economy has been, plagiarized in literally millions of web pages and ostensibly credible literature, all pretending to have done their own research, all reporting my parable of perfect economy, which is my words issued out of the fictional mouth of Benjamin Franklin. And Alan Hodgson Brown, Bill Still, Stephen Zarlinga, Edwin Vieira, all these people plagiarize that story, Jacques Jacquerin, as if it's history and their work discovered it. And there was only one place to get it, and that's my work, And so if you're looking for alternate solution, I can spare you the time, but go ahead and look. The only reason to look after, examining an issue, is there an alternate solution to inflation and deflation? It's a simple mathematic question. It has one answer. All mathematic questions have one answer. Is there an alternate solution for irreversible multiplication of falsified indebtedness by interest? There's only one answer to that question as well, because interest is unjustifiable. And those things are volumetric or dispositional improprieties of money, and it has no other potential or dimension which can impose wrong upon us. So we've solved those things, and the only other thing that we can possibly think is another problem is any combination of those things, and that was the most challenging aspect of my work, to realize that everything else was a combination, and it falls into what I give as the second of a sum of three only possible categoric faults of any prospective monetary thesis, and that second or combination is systemic manipulation of the cost or value of money or property. And because it's a combination of volumetric improprieties like inflation and deflation, or dispositional improprieties such as inherent multiplication of falsified indebtedness by interest, being as systemic manipulation is the combination of those two faults, you've already solved it, because you've already solved multiplication of falsified indebtedness by interest by eradicating interest, and you solve inflation and deflation by an obligatory schedule of payment retiring principal at the rate of consumption of the related property. Period. That's it. That's mathematically perfected economy in a few words. It's basically the universal right to issue unexploited promissory obligations free of exploitation and subject to this obligatory schedule of payment. So that's it. That's it in a nutshell. We are the issuers of money even under this system. The banking system simply takes command of it, intervenes upon our affairs to obfuscate the currency, to make incredible, unwarranted profit at the consequence of the fact that the means of exploitation happen to be terminal. And what would we do otherwise? If we didn't suffer terminal failure, we would tolerate this forever if they could restrain it. I mean, that's how stupid we are that we go about this. Now, anyone who claims to come up with another solution is coming up with a solution after a fact of one solution was proven 44 years ago. And all they're doing is adding to the confusion and the further division of all the people. So, no need to repeat that any longer. But if you think there's another solution, you haven't even been listening very well so far because, the statement is self-evident even that there's a singular solution to inflation and deflation. From the definition of inflation and deflation, a person with second-grade math skills can work out that singular solution. Why? Because one thing, inflation is defined as an increase in money per goods and services, and deflation is a decrease in money per goods and services. What is neither? A circulation, which is always equal to goods and services. And the only way that a circulation is equal to goods and services is if the circulation declines or is retired as the value of the related property or entitlement declines, which is the rate of consumption. So you have to pay and retire money from circulation at the rate of consumption in order to solve inflation and deflation, which is the only way that you get an immutable currency or a perpetual one-to-one-to-one relationship between remaining circulation, remaining value of represented property, and remaining obligation to pay just that much for the remaining value of represented property, all determined by the people, not by government at all. All the government involved is a common monetary infrastructure which deploys or implements whatever we decide we want to be the rate of depreciation or consumption of the related property, or however we want to decide the lifespan of the property. And of course, there are very fundamental, concrete means of determining those things. They're not part of an economy. They're part of implementing an economy, adhering to these principles of an eradication of exploitation and an obligatory schedule of payment. So implementation is likewise reduced to these few facts, and I've even prescribed default methods for accounting for depreciation or consumption of property, and really nobody's even had any beef with them, So the whole way is paved, complete with default methods, as you would write a software program, as my trade, obviously, to default to some behavior that's necessary at a minimum. It's already done. All the work is done. It's all ready to do, And yet, nobody's throwing any money at this. I don't have any time to really look at any, and somebody with moderately deep pockets could make this thing happen, and it isn't happening. And what do people do? We have a meeting with Roger Hayes, and what does he do? He forms another bank. Or we have a meeting with a fellow named Mark Cocking, and the next thing you know, he's running around with a UFOologist named Richard Hall, claiming that they're authoring and promoting mathematically perfected economy. They don't even understand it, how we're going to implement it, how we're going to transform the present system. It's nothing. That's all we have is further division. So it's our fault. So I think that's enough to conclude it tonight. Thanks for everybody's participation here. I would say look at the mandate, and if the closest thing that comes to mind as a shortcut would be, like when Ben's talking across the gate to the sheriff and the guardia there, to say, hey, look, here's a copy of the document. If you want to understand, what's wrong, pay a little study to this, because you're going to see a lot more copies of this. If you can prove it wrong, we're interested in talking about that.
No, absolutely. Well, thanks for your time, Mike. Mike, could you send me a recording of this session?
Sure can.
Thanks, mate.
Sure can.
Right, that's great. Yeah.
In fact, instead of doing a special one, let me just chop the ends off of it and make it a radio program tomorrow, and you can listen to it on TNS, and I'll have it uploaded to the archives at perfectedeconomy.org /FTP, and I'll post a link to it as soon as I get it uploaded. I'll post a link here in this discussion group and the other MPE discussion groups that we have so that everybody can download it. All right?
All right, mate. Yeah, great. Don't want to make work for you, but that's...
Oh, no, yeah, that'll minimize it, and then we'll have it, you know?
Terrific.
Great.
Mate. Yeah, excellent, mate.
Okay, gentlemen.
Thank
well,
you.
thanks again to everybody, and let's, concentrate on making this happen, and it will. I mean, most of the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted, and, it's a matter of, do we want to stay together on this, or are we all going to fire the first shot at our own whim?
Mike, you've done the theory. We need to get to the practical.
Yeah. Great, Jim.
Excellent, mate.
Okay, thanks buddy. Thanks, everybody, and good night, all right?
Yeah.
Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, Mike.
All right.
Thanks, everybody.
Good night now.
Yeah.
The time for pretenders and the division they foster is over. We are all in this together. We have no rights that we will refuse to stand for. Thus, never until we unite over a singular fact of representation and monetary solution will our future be the future we alone would make it. Thanks again for listening. I am Mike Montagne, and we are all related.